Welcome to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio, bringing you insights and strategies to help you create a magnificent and fulfilling second half of life. Here's your host, certified professional retirement coach and best-selling author, Dr. Dorian Mintzer.
I want to welcome everybody to the Revolutionize Your Retirement Interview with Expert series. I'm Dorian Mintzer. I'm owner of Revolutionize Retirement and also host for your call. So without further ado, I want to get started and tell you a little about my guest today. Robert Laurel, I'm going to be referring to him as Bob. He says that he's comfortable with Bob, is my guest today. And actually, just a little background on it. I've never met Bob in person, but we met through an article that Olivia Mellon did a year ago in, I think it was December or January, in Investment Advisor. And she had focused on Couples Retirement Puzzle, which is a book that I co-authored with Roberta Taylor. And she focused on Bob's book, Naked Retirement. And that's when I first learned about him and his work. And then he and I are on a listserv so that I periodically hear things from him. And he's been just doing incredibly wonderful work. And I have read his ebook, Naked Retirement, and recommend it to people, but we'll be talking more about that today. So the focus today is going to be on no regrets retirement planning, an empowering look at maximizing retirement's opportunities. And let me just tell you a little about Bob. He's a leading retirement activist, and he combines his social work skills, which he developed a long while ago, and retirement income expertise, and helps people plan for every aspect of retirement. He maintains multiple roles, including president of Synergos. Did I pronounce that right, Synergos?
Close enough.
Close enough, okay, financial group, founder of retirementproject.org, creator of Retirement Wellness Report and dividendpaycheck.org, as well as serving as a syndicated columnist for both Forbes.com and Financial Advisor magazine. And I think you'll hear that Bob, even with his financial background, really talks about the non-financial parts of retirement, and really resonates so much with the work that I do, because so much is about thinking about retirement planning in a holistic way and having conversations with whoever's important to you. So, Bob, maybe we can start telling us a little about what personal and client experiences led you to this idea of creating what you call a no regrets retirement plan.
Yeah, thanks, Dory. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in just to be a part of the program. For me, so I am a financial professional. We do help people plan for retirement, but it was interesting on how I got to this point. Obviously, my background was in social work. I've done individual, family, and group therapy, and I'm a very curious person, and I found a major disconnect along the way between practice and theory. In theory, we help people plan for retirement, but all we really do is help them build up a pot of money that they can use at that point in time. And so a couple of very interesting things happened to me in the process of transitioning from a social worker to a financial professional. The first eye-opening situation for me was I was working with a friend of mine. He had bought a house and he was remodeling it, and his dad, who was retired, was helping us to take care of the kitchen. And so we were knocking out cabinets and removing countertops, and very loud and noisy. And we took a quick break, and I was early in the financial services industry, and of course, so everybody was a prospect at that point. And so I said, Ernie, it must be great being retired, having the time, the energy, and the resources to come help out your son like this. And he stopped me dead in my tracks, and that's when I just went silent in the room. And he said, Bob, don't ever retire, because you won't mean anything to anyone anymore. He said, don't ever retire. You won't mean anything to anyone anymore. And here I was, brand new in retirement planning, if you will, thinking it is the ideal time of life. It is the perfect point. It's what everyone strives for. And here's a guy who's in his mid-60s, in good health, saying, don't ever do it. And that was a real shocker and an eye-opener for me, that there's really a lot more going on than just the financial components. And so that was a big component for me. In a couple other situations, I spoke with another client, and he began to walk me through how much time he spends with me and how much time he does other things. And what I really realized is that when I did the math on how much, almost 100% of a client's retirement plan is spent with their financial advisor. And on average, if I have a client who wants to talk to me and doesn't have anything else to do and comes to my office once a month, I might spend 10, 12 hours a year with them when they're retired, yet 100% of their planning is focused on what I do. And I think that the final thing that kind of helped me see things from a different perspective is this is actually the practice management part. I had a client, they had a perfect retirement. She was a stay-at-home mom. He was the chief of police. They sold their house at the perfect time. They had plenty of money. They loved to golf and entertain. Their family was perfect. Everything was great. It was storybook type stuff. And then she had a stroke, a severe stroke, and he became a caregiver, and it completely changed the entire dynamics, and everything they had hoped for, put off, and planned for was gone in one moment. And that, to me, was a catalyst to say, hey, let's take a look beyond just the dollars and cents and make sure people are prepared to make the most not only of their time in retirement, but the time leading up to it.
Those are really profound examples, and I must say, as you were saying that, I was thinking of other situations where I've seen the same kind of thing happen, and I like your concept of a no-regrets retirement. Part of what I always say is part of the goal is wanting to reach the end of life with no regrets, and so I think it's so important to think about how does one think about it in a different way. So I'm so delighted that you're here talking with us about it, because life can change in a dime. Please do. Yeah.
A couple other important things is I love watching those shows, Just Escape Death or Accidents Gone Bad or other things. And you never hear people say, gosh, the only thing that kept me alive was the fact that I wanted to make sure my CD didn't auto-renew, or I wanted to make sure that my dividend check went to the right place. They never point out a financial thing. I've had clients who've passed away. I've gone to their funerals. They never call me out and say, it wouldn't be possible without Bob Laura. We're so thankful for him. And then as part of my writing for Forbes, I had the opportunity to interview a lot of different people, and I interviewed Pastor Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life and who's a pastor of a large church out in California, Saddleback Church. And he said he had sat by literally hundreds, if not thousands, of bedsides as people lay dying, and nobody asked to see the deed of their house. Nobody asked to review their investment statements. They want to surround themselves with the people they care about. And so part of my mission has been is to say the money stuff is important. It does play a role, but it's not the most important thing.
It's wonderful hearing a financial planner, even though I know you've got the social work background, but it's so important to hear that. And I think, does it become important, do you think, for people, because we have a lot of both professionals and non-professionals on the phone, to really question their financial planner about these other aspects and if they're interested in them?
I think there's a lot of dynamics, and I think there's so many different personalities because, again, Dory, for yourself, I look at the value that you add. Really, in your role and your expertise, you could partner with a financial advisor. So I don't know that it's imperative that the financial advisor be savvy necessarily in all these areas if they're partnered or paired with another professional, because, again, there are just quants in our industry who they're good at the numbers and that's what they want to run. But it is, I think you want someone who can nudge you to question those other things, because it's when there's just that sole focus on money, that's when I see the biggest transitions heading into retirement. And so I think it's important for the financial services industry. They don't have to necessarily be as well-versed or as passionate about the topic as I do, but they should have, at a minimum, tools and resources that raise people's awareness about the need to plan for this stuff.
That's a great point and a good way to look at it. So from your perspective, what do you think people miss or, I guess, also avoid if they're just focusing on the more traditional money retirement plan?
The biggest challenge, again, is that the advertising and the myths we put around what retirement truly is and what it means. There's this perception of it, this great place and amazing things are going to happen, but people miss the fact that retirement really is empty, and it's up to you to fill it up with what you want. And if you're not prepared to fill it up, something else will find its way in there. You talked about the article that we're in an Investment Advisor magazine, and probably one of my claims to fame is talking about the not so popular, the taboo, or the ugly stuff. And there's a dark side to retirement that people miss. It includes addiction, depression, suicide. And if you don't plan to replace your work identity, fill your time, stay connected to family and friends, every Friday or every day is a Friday or a Saturday. And so it's very easy to see how alcohol and drugs start to creep into the picture. Depression is very prevalent, especially among women who become caregivers or don't have time for themselves or feel overwhelmed by their spouse now being home full time. And probably the scariest statistic of that group I came across, and again, this is in my slides, and at the end I'll get you guys some free guides and stuff that you can get access to these statistics and other things, but the highest rate of suicide is among white males age 65 and older. And that was disturbing to me. Even having been in the social work industry, I would have thought it was, 13 or 14-year-old girls or something, just based on issues with self-esteem and other factors. But it's that age 65 and older, particularly white males, because the same issues that adolescents and people struggle with self-esteem, the exact same things that happen to people when they leave their career, because people are so focused on what they do instead of who they are.
It was when I read that in the Investment Advisor, I got really interested too and started doing more research, and it's mind-boggling and really scary. So that loneliness, depression, addiction, suicide, you're absolutely right. You're one of the first people I know who talk about the dark side of retirement. I just want to comment too, Donna has told me that she did get the slides up, and to let you know, Bob, that she's trying to catch them up with your talk. So if there's a particular slide that you want, and for people who aren't on the internet, if it's okay with Bob, the slides will be available when the recording goes out. So
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. And I'm on the slides. The fourth slide says Dark Side of Retirement. It's got a Grim Reaper on there. And it's got some of the statistics, but I'll get everyone I've got a guide called The Dark Side of Retirement that goes into details about all of these pieces. And I'll just, to that point, I wish I could tell you I came up with this on my own, but it's happening across the board. What happened was I was done writing my book, Naked Retirement. I thought I was. And a doctor, a friend of mine, stopped by my office, and I told him very proudly, I just finished my book. I want you to take a look at it. And he started thumbing through it. And, of course, I confidently said, do you think I'm missing anything I'm not covering about retirees? And he goes, absolutely. You're missing addiction. It's one of the biggest things I see right now. And that's what kind of pushed me into this whole area, because it's not so much even the traditional drugs, but the prescription drugs. And I've done a lot of research, and there's even been some news shows on grandma and grandpa as a drug addict, especially down in Florida, going door to door, if you will, with some of the clinics to get pain meds to resell them on the street. And so it's a significant problem. You can lump in there gambling, a number of things. And again, if you look at what's happening over in Japan, another big area of issue for retirees is crime. They're living longer. They don't have enough money, and so they have to resort to petty theft and petty crime, which tends to be underreported because people feel bad or guilty about it. But it's a very real scenario that, again, you don't see a 30-second commercial with a spouse having a stroke, a spouse being drunk, or a family member gambling away their wealth. But it happens every day. And again, and I'm going on here, but I think this is what I appreciate most about what the baby boomers are doing for retirement. We talk about how the baby boomers are changing retirement, but people don't qualify it or quantify it. The real reality of it, they're talking about it. It's coming out from the shadows. Retirement is very much like an iceberg where a lot of the superficial stuff gets talked about. Just, I got to plan this, and we're going to travel, we're going to watch the grandkids, and really that is a small amount of what really happens. And that's the big difference that's taking place. And that's where, again, professionals need to sharpen up their skills, and as well as individuals need to be aware of these issues so they can recognize them and get fixes and remedies and treatments for it.
I can't underscore that enough. And it's really tied in with the notion of what you just said earlier, too, that people end up just like that guy who was helping build the house. People, if you haven't thought about what your identity is post-work, then it's too easy to feel irrelevant and empty and there's nothing to live for, and then you spiral into all kinds of things. So it's so important for people to think about this. So how do you work with people? What's the process that you've developed to help people focus on these other aspects of life so that they don't hopefully fall into the dark side, or if they start to, they're able to, maybe with help or without help, but just get themselves out of it because they begin to see what needs to happen?
A big part of what I think my job is raising awareness, and I do that through, you could read the book and conceptualize it. We do webinars, we do in-person worksheets. We actually, to make a retirement workshop, other advisors and professionals can license it, conduct it themselves, because I'm never going to be in Columbus, Ohio doing it, or out east. And I think it's critically important to just walk people through a series of exercises, because we don't want to be, I don't want, and I call them workshops because I don't want to be up on a stage pontificating, here's what I know or here's what I learned. I think the important thing about working with baby boomers and retirees is looking for ways for them to uncover it and see it for themselves. And so what I've done with Naked Retirement in the workshop is walk people through a series of exercises so they can see and look at it for themselves in their own eyes. One of my favorite things to do, and this is the next slide, Donna, one of my favorite questions to ask people is simply this. On your retirement cruise, you're left stranded on a deserted island. This comes as a big relief. You think it's bad, but this comes as a big relief because you no longer have to deal with a family member, a friend or other relationship, a money issue, a specific commitment, or a decision you've been hesitant to make. And what's powerful about the question is it very quickly and very concisely pinpoints a major stress that you have going into retirement. Unfortunately, most people think there's some magical line they cross over, and once they're in retirement, it's going to get better, but it's actually probably going to get worse because you have more time and fewer distractions. And so problems tend to get compounded. And so I think one of the most important things that people can do is identify stress they have right now, the fears or concerns that they have, and start working towards a resolution or putting things into practice to reduce or eliminate that anxiety. And so we want to walk people through a series, and there's a retirement perceptions quiz. I think there's 5 or 6 exercises that we go through in the workshop and in the book to clue people into, okay, this isn't just about money. I need to be thinking about these other things, and then to encourage them to take that next step. You'll also see down in my next slide, one of the funniest things to do to people is to ask them to write down what a perfect day and a perfect week looks like in retirement. Because I think what happens to a lot of people is they get these mental thoughts or ideas like, hey, here's what I'm going to do, and that's going to be this, and it's going to be that. And then when you force them to put it on a piece of paper, they get to Tuesday, and they don't know what to do. And so for the first time, instead of just asking them broadly and very generally, what's retirement look like? What's all this stuff? Hey, write down what every moment of the day looks like and what's so great about it. It gives people pause to say, I guess I haven't thought about what Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday is going to look like and how I'm going to replace my work identity, fill my time, and stay connected to people.
It was interesting. Part of this vacation that I've been on was being on a cruise, and a lot of people on the cruise are either pre-retirees or retirees. And needless to say, I was talking with a lot of people about a lot of these issues. And it really is interesting, the whole spectrum of people's attitudes. Some are still in kind of the honeymoon phase, those who have retired, and others really already know, and it's part of what I think you help people get to, is the importance of having purpose and meaning in life and sort of thinking about who am I separate from work. But it was really interesting. I had this whole group of people aboard representing so much of what you're talking about, the continuum. And it was interesting because this happened to be a cruise that had free alcohol, which I don't think it should have, but it did. And there were some people, you could just see, some people from morning to night were drinking. I probably shouldn't say that. I won't say what cruise line I was on. But it's too easy to fall into that. And it ties in Paul from Florida does comment that if we help people discover their true purpose, hopefully the dark side will become lighter. And he wanted to know, and I think it ties into what you're talking about, what's your perspective on living the second half of life on purpose and the purposeful aging?
I think that's critical. One of the guides I've written is called How to Find Your Passion in Retirement. And again, passion is such a... What I find about retirement and even financial planning, a lot of things, there's a lot of superficial concepts. I'm a nuts and bolts kind of guy. Give me the good stuff, like how do you really do it? And several years ago, I stumbled upon a process to help people find their passion in retirement. And it's simply identifying what is timeless, tireless, and causes contagious energy. So 3 things. What is timeless? What, when you're doing it, does time not matter? You could just do it all day long. What is tireless? If you think about a 2-year-old, they say, do it again, do it again. What do you just keep doing over and over again that you don't mind doing? And then what causes contagious energy? There's certain things when people know when you're talking about a topic or a situation, you really light up, you really brighten up. That's what you want to identify pre-retirement or even post-retirement to. What are those things, and how can you start to structure parts of your life around that? And so that's the kind of the next step for people, is to raise awareness, and not just about the negative things, but to identify that passion. And even one of the books I've written, or one of the guides, is starting a business for retirement income. You know, how to turn that passion or that hobby into cash to support your other investments.
So there are going to be a lot of things that Bob says at the end, so that you'll have information and links on how to learn more about some of the things that he's been working on and writing. Karen from Minneapolis says that, Bob, thanks for bringing out this dark side of retirement. She said, I've known about the suicide rate for men, but sharing about the addictions, depression, and gambling is very important too. It really is part of the area people just have not tended to pay attention to.
You look at the gambling in particular, so what do you do when you're retired? At some point, you're going to go to the senior center. What's their specialization? Casino trips. You're going to get a buffet. They chuck you on a bus and take you down. If you don't have something to replace that, that's where you go, feeding the machines. And again, if you don't see that on the commercial, all of a sudden your mom or your spouse or someone's doing it, and it can be extremely harmful.
Yeah, I think one has to be careful that you or a loved one doesn't spiral into that, because it's, quote, all there is to do. So what are some of the other examples? I have so many examples in your book, too, about how to really get in touch with what it is that matters to you, so that it's not just the numbers. Can you share a little more about that, too?
I think a big thing is, and this is a big thing for me, and again, at the end, a high percentage of my stuff is free, all my guides and all my wellness reports, and even things advisors and coaches can use as their own if they like. But it's communication. So I think that, again, if I look at how often is a client really in my office, it's not that often. But if you read my articles on Forbes, sure, I'll talk about the top 10 dividend-paying stocks, but I'm also going to talk about the mental challenges that people have in their first year of retirement. And so I think it's finding resources to keep around to keep you cognizant of these things and to kind of push you a little bit more to say, hey, if today was your last day, what kind of regrets are you going to have? What things can you be doing today to stay motivated, inspired? And one of the biggest key words I find with baby boomers and pre and existing retirees as well is relevant. How do you stay relevant? And so part of the communication, a lot of the material I create is designed to facilitate relevancy, to encourage people to do more, to break the rules, to try something different, to look at something from a completely different perspective. And so for professionals on the line, I think that's where the opportunity to integrate this into your practice, no matter if it's real estate, coaching, or advising, is to offer tools and resources that facilitate lifelong learning, relevancy, education, knowledge, wisdom, those kind of things, and activities, getting out there and doing things. So that's why I created the Retirement Wellness Report, the guides, all the stuff. We'll get you links to so people can see it, subscribe to it, and be a part of it.
Great. I have a comment here from Alan from Louisiana, to get my state straight here. And he says, I just lost one of my aggravations. My divorce was granted yesterday. Only problem there went half of my retirement. So,
go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. That was his comment. I think he wanted you to respond to that if you could in terms of...
What's really happening is we're seeing a growing number of divorces. And the quickest way to lose half of what you worked hard for is to get divorced. And a lot of times what I see, and we can talk about issues, opportunities, and challenges with couples. The problem with financial planning today is we make people afraid of their resources, and we encourage people to postpone or to put off doing the things that are important to them. We medicate them that there's some benefit to waiting. Now, don't get me wrong. You still have to save and do other things, but what ends up happening in most cases is live in a deteriorating world. So your health deteriorates, your relationships deteriorate. A lot of things go by the wayside over time, but everyone is so focused on getting to this number. Now, there are some very real dynamics where I'm not a divorce advocate. I personally have been divorced, so I know what it's like to lose half your stuff, Alan. But there's situations, and it is about exploring what's going to be best for you long term, but I find that divorce is usually the result of people postponing or putting off the things that are most important to them until later, and then at that point it becomes too late. Really quickly, I'll also say for guys who are retirees or couples, I tend to find that guys are surprised when they get the notice that their spouse, that their wife wants to divorce them. But it's been my experience that women tend to go through the process. Dor, you can talk more about this. By the time a woman gets to a point where she's divorcing the spouse, they've already been thinking about it and trying to remedy it for 2 years. And so they're already emotionally at a point where that divorce is going to happen. And for guys, we tend to get so caught up in our work and that role that we miss the signs that say, hey, it's time to reconnect and make this work, instead of just assuming it's going to work out because you're saving enough and you won't have anything to do in a couple of years.
I think that's so often the experience, and the lack of being able to talk together so that your ships passing in the night and not necessarily working in the same direction can lead to many dynamics that ultimately can lead to divorce or just an emotional divorce, even if people stay together. I know part of my work is working with couples and helping the conversations, but how have you been finding that you're able to help couples work together and talk together to create this no regrets plan together? Can you speak a little about that?
So I'm going to cheat on this question too, because I want you to share some of your thoughts as we go through this part, because you're much more the expert on. I am not a couples counselor or a marriage counselor, but what's funny about my role as an advisor is a lot of times I will have couples that I'm working with, and on occasion they don't drive together. And so I could be sitting at the desk and they come in, and I say, oh, how are things going? How's so-and-so's retirement? And you talk about opening up a can of worms, and then I get hammered with all the things that aren't going well and the things they wish would happen. And it's an interesting dynamic. And what I find most often is we all make assumptions about retirement. And the problem is they stay in our head and they don't get communicated. And so again, in my book, I'm sure I think in your book, and you've written a bunch of stuff, I think, about just the questions you need to be asking. Mm-hmm. And so I encourage people just start the dialogue, because me being a guy, I know how I function, and I beat up guys a little bit. My wife cannot come to me and say, I want to talk about this because I either want to fix it that second or I don't want to hear about it. And so it tends to, so I think for beating up on guys a little bit, it's about introducing these conversations and topics and starting to have dialogue of what does retirement look like? How are you going to be spending your day? Who are you going to be hanging out with? One of the things one of the women in one of my workshops said, that she said, I told my husband, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch every day. And it's even just as simple as that. Are you going to have breakfast, lunch, and dinner together every day? How much time are you going to spend apart? Those are things that just people assume are going to work out, but it ends up hurting feelings, especially for us guys, because, and again, I'm being hard on us, and this is stereotypical, but we think we're so great that our spouse is going to want to be around us all the time. I mean, why wouldn't my wife want to spend 24/7 with me? But unfortunately, that's not the case, and so hurt feelings can end up because his expectations are, we're having lunch every day. Her expectations are, I want to go to the grocery store alone. Don't touch my spice rack. And I'm meeting the girls and you're not going. So it really is a matter of starting discussions and establishing boundaries. I'll end with, I think a lot of times you may need to involve a third party like yourself, Dory, to help really drill down and get to the point.
I agree so much. I think I always say assumptions get people into hot water, and people often think that they don't want to talk because they're going to open up Pandora's box, but actually talking even about really hard areas, and we'll get into, because I know you really help focus on some of these sensitive areas also, can very much bring people closer together rather than drive you apart. But the fear sometimes gets in the way, so you just put it off. Don't talk about the expectations, and then you keep disappointing each other and yourself. So it's hard.
Yeah, and I think it is just, and that's where I think grabbing a book like yours, having some free guides or a newsletter, putting that stuff right, because people tend to just pick stuff up and read stuff. And so it's about having the conversations, having material that continues to raise the awareness. And so it's not just buying a book. It's buying a book. It's attending a workshop. It's participating in a teleseminar like this. It's doing those other things. And there are so many tools and resources out there. It's just a matter of kind of investing some time and energy to identify them and allocate yourself with them.
And how do you help people make the actual changes? I know that's part of the work that you do, but maybe you can share some examples of that. Things can be great in theory, but what are some of the things you try to help people look at and do? And I know you have people do a lot of exercises and writing, and so maybe you can share some of that with the listeners.
And I think it comes back to, and this is, I've kind of run the full gamut of all my amazing and shocking strategies, but for the most part, it's challenging their perceptions about what's in front of them and getting them to look at retirement through a different lens that really helps them identify planning for themselves and not just their money. Again, for me, it's a combination of the workshop, of the exercises. My clients, my newsletter for my financial services company has an economic update. But on the back, there's always something about whether it's a motivational or inspirational story, an article I've written about taking care of yourself, about losing your vision, your hearing. And again, you tend to find a lot of stuff about retirement planning very generalized. What's people's biggest fear? Running out of money, health care, losing a loved one? Yep. But what's a real fear that people see and experience? One of the biggest ones is losing your hearing. And because you won't feel connected. And I've had a client myself who he's extremely successful. Guy will never run out of money and tons of family. But he hates when his family comes over because when they're sitting at the table, and just this last Christmas he had 50 people at his house, and he hated it the whole time because the way his hearing aids work, he can't participate in conversations. And so he feels very isolated and disconnected even around family and friends. And so that's the kind of stuff that I like to drill down to say, hey, be aware and conscious of this stuff. Same thing like with when you get dentures, and even if you have some work done on your teeth, you can lose a lot of the satisfaction you get from food with the taste and other things. And it's a matter of just bringing that stuff up with the dark side. And I know a lot of this sounds like negatives, but I don't have to preach the positives and the benefits retirement can have because it's out there. But being realistic about what's going to happen, because same thing, baby boomers tend to think about their body and think they're invincible and they're never going to age. The real reality is 40%, some research I did a while ago, 40% of baby boomers aged 50 to 65 had trouble squatting, gripping a bar, standing up for 2 hours. And that's a good statistic, but what that translates into is you're not going to be able to travel the way you want to. You're not going to be able to spend time on the floor with the grandkids if you're not taking care of yourself. I don't care how much money you got. if you don't have your health, you're not going to have anything. And so that's the kind of stuff I try to nudge people to. And again, I've got some financial advisors typically have relationships with accountants, attorneys, and I have those, but I also am not afraid to say, hey, Planet Fitness or this workshop is doing this, or hey, a good friend of mine works at a rehab facility. Hey, go talk to him about some exercises you can do, and hey, here's a therapist recommendation to go. Because again, therapist doesn't mean you have problems, it means you need someone to talk to, and so having those resources is important as well.
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's getting that reality. And as you say, baby boomers, one of the leading edge ones of them, and many people on the call probably are part of that demographic. There is that sense that we're going to stay healthy and vital, and hopefully we will, but there's still those changes and losses that happen. And when you gave that example of the hearing, I know my husband's hearing's gotten worse, and it's really hard, and you have to modify things, and it's not like giving up your dreams. You just have to sometimes change some of the dreams or change some of how you deal with it. And oftentimes people are resistant to wanting to confront that. So it's so good hearing you talk about that. Yeah.
You bring up an important point, because I don't care if you're the world's greatest investor. If you don't have strong emotional intelligence, you are going to make a rough transition into retirement. And when I talk about emotional intelligence, that for me is your ability to be at a peak, hit a trough, and get back to the peak. How much time does that take? And to your point, Dory, about the hearing issue, so you can surrender to it. You can just throw you're done. Okay, it's over. Things aren't going to be the way it was. I just got to accept it. Or you can look for ways to modify your situation. And that's the emotional intelligence that people have. A successful retirement isn't one that doesn't have any problems. It's one in which you overcome the problems. And that's what people miss. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be easy. If you understand that, you're going to have a much better time making that transition than if you just assume everything's going to be great, and hopefully it turns out that way, but it's not very likely. At some point it's going to catch up to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I like your point, too, and I truly believe it, of trying to start anticipating and planning ahead of time. Because if you keep putting off and saying, oh, when I retire, when I'm not working, when this, when that, something may happen, and there's never the time to do it. So that it becomes so important in identifying what's important and say, start now. You don't have to be retired already to start. And I know that's a big part of what you stress.
It is. It's even for myself. I have one of the best seats in the house. I get to see what my life is going to look like 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I can either choose to accept that, and it just motivates me every day to wake up saying, you know what, it's up to me. And retirement is a frame of mind. I retired from corporate America years ago. And when you start to look at what does retirement mean, it also is surrendering, I think, what you can and can't control. That's the real freedom and the liberty that you get, is when you surrender to what's really out there, what's really going on, and accept that and make the most of it instead of just trying to control everything and make things fit into a little black box because they don't fit.
So how, just to shift a little bit, but since I know some of the people on the line probably, since they know you're a financial planner, want to hear maybe a little of that, and there are other topics I still want to get to too, but how can people create a no-regrets plan when it comes to their money and asset allocation? Can they, and how do they go about doing that?
So a couple of important things. Again, I tell people, don't be afraid of your resources. You don't have to save anything for some future date. You've got to strike that balance. And I think it's also important to realize what you can and you can't control. You can't control the stock market. I think one of the biggest issues that a lot of retirees make is they were very successful in their careers. And so they worked hard, they were persistent, they were diligent, they did all the right things. Those same skills don't always transfer over to managing your investments in the stock market because the stock market is very illogical. And so it's more about having a disciplined approach as well as time and experience in managing those dynamics. And so that's an important financial concept to not try to think that your other successes in life will translate into managing your money in the marketplace. Whether you're doing it yourself or advisors doing it, you can't control the stock market, or it's more about managing your expectations and your emotional intelligence. The other thing I tell every client and every investor out there is no one cares more about your money than you. And when you adopt that philosophy, you take on a very different role with your money and with a financial professional and other people, because you don't have to be a financial guru. You don't have to understand modern portfolio theory. You don't have to understand how preferred stocks work. But you want to know the right questions to ask, and you need to be an active and involved partner. People today are more responsible for the retirement than ever before. And so you've got to be involved. You've got to be a little bit of a pain in the butt. You got to ask the tough questions. And what you'll find is you're going to weed out the advisors that don't want to be teachers. One of the biggest transitions you're seeing, in my opinion, in financial services is we used to be information hoarders. We wouldn't tell you anything because then you wouldn't need us, right? And so what you're seeing a transition take place is our role is becoming information provider. I want my clients to understand the strategies and the things that I'm employing so they can conceptually understand where their investments may or may not go. And so there is a transition taking place, and thankfully because of different hourly or fee-based types of things, people can align themselves with a life planner who's fee-based or hourly-based, or there's just a ton of options. But again, you got to go out there and look for it. The final thing I'll share with just, again, aligning your money with no regrets. There are no rules. So there are some rules of thumb. I hear people all the time say, oh, I was put in this because I was told investing in individual stocks was too risky. Says who? And so there's a lot of things, but it's based on the financial services industry, in my opinion, doing everything for efficiency purposes. And granted, there are some very important reasons why people should use packaged products, and individual stocks aren't for everybody. That's just an example of something that typically comes up of, I didn't think I could use individual stocks. You can. You can look past the rules. It is your money. You can look at alternative assets. There's nothing to say that you can't take some of your money and buy a piece of property, invest in that, invest in a family member's business. Other things is, I think entrepreneurship is an asset class, and so starting your own business in retirement, because it's very hard to save enough money to just sit around and do nothing for 20 or 30 years. Now, that doesn't mean just dump all your money into this great business idea your brother-in-law came up with, but it's not being afraid to question some of the status quo and try some of these things without overexposing yourself or mispositioning yourself. And so I just want to encourage people to say, whatever the rules are, just take a step to the right or the left and ask lots of questions, and don't be afraid to explore.
And I like what you say about remember that it's your money, and that even if you're asking someone for help, you need to keep in mind that it's really your money, or need to think about how you want it to work for you.
Yeah, because it's funny for me too, because I have clients who feel guilty or nervous about asking me for a distribution. I'm thinking about taking out some money, but I'm not sure. I'm like, you got enough, and here's how this works. But again, people are so programmed that they're going to run out of money and be a bag lady or eating dog food. And that's not to say you've got to take the financials serious, but again, it's not the ultimate and only focus.
You're saying to try to shift from being so fear-based and to think more about the possibilities, yeah.
And that's what our industry is fear-based. It is like you're going to do terrible things without an advisor. You're going to run out of money. But this financial product I've created is going to make you happy. No, it's not. It's going to make you happy is what you do with yourself every day, not how much money you got.
I can't underscore that enough. And in fact, Karen says from Minneapolis, I like your approach. I hope to share your book with my financial planner, and she wants to know how to get a hold of it. So at the end, we'll talk about that. But a few other things too, because I do want to encourage people to ask questions or comments so that I can integrate them in. And yes, there was a question. The slides will be made available when the recording goes out. So people don't have to worry about that. But you've already mentioned some aspects of the dark side of retirement, but I know that from your book, you also deal with some other, what are thought of as taboo topics like spirituality and other things like that. And I wondered if you could talk a little about what are some of the other topics that you've seen are pretty sensitive that are important for people to think about and talk about.
This is my favorite stuff. This is what happens when you're a social worker. You become immune to some of this stuff, and there's just no barrier. I'm a very curious person, so I like to know, but spirituality is an important one. And I don't address spirituality because I'm trying to convert people to my beliefs or say you got to go to church or anything, but they say there's no atheist in the foxhole. And again, I think people have potentially drifted away from some beliefs or just haven't really align themselves spiritually. And so I'm not and I don't do this with every client. There's situations where people are looking and searching, and it's not bad to just, basically people perceive retirement as the ultimate goal, as their final destination. But the only guarantee that comes with retirement is that you'll die at some point. And again, not trying to encourage any particular set of beliefs, but what comes after that? What kind of things do you need to be lining up and doing? Because it's what happens to a lot of people when you read what hospice nurses hear or what questions people have. It does come out a lot of the spirituality stuff. And so, again, it's just a thought process for people to begin to explore that side of things. And that's a taboo topic. That's like talking about politics and sex with your financial advisor. We don't cover any sex-related stuff. I'm not afraid of politics, but one of the big topics that comes up, things with children, saying no to your adult children. A lot of people struggle with drawing a line in the sand, leaving more money to one child than another child, divorce, retiring at the same time or different times. And all this is addressed I've got a guide called 7 Retirement Questions You're Afraid to Ask that I talk about some of these topics. And again, what I'm trying to do is give permission to people to talk about it. And it's kind of funny because here we are talking about mature, smart, knowledgeable people entering into retirement, but because they haven't been given permission before, there has been a platform to talk about it, they don't know if they can. And that's what I want to change. I want to give people permission to talk about this stuff.
Mm-hmm. That's what I hear, and I so agree with you. That's my whole work, too, of not being afraid to talk about it, and that the talking actually is going to help things. I have another question for you here from Loretta, who's from Colorado. She says, with 4 generations of Alzheimer's in my family, including my brother, my husband and I have accelerated our bucket list plans and talked about home care versus a care facility. Any suggestions on other topics that we should address?
Good question. Yeah, all that stuff. Because I think one of the other big things that people miss is what's called an ethical will. And again, it's very easy to talk about, you need to look at life insurance, long-term care insurance. You need to look at your estate plan. You look at should you put your house in a trust? Will you have enough assets to ride out a long-term care stay for 5 or 7 years with Alzheimer's? But more importantly, an ethical will is what personal values and beliefs do you want to pass on to future generations? What memories do you want to start creating right now? Because really at the end of the day, you don't want people to remember visiting you at the long-term care facility when you have Alzheimer's. You want to take that fishing trip now. You want to take that Disney trip now. So accelerate those same things and make sure it's part of the process. When you're sitting around at the campfire eating s'mores, you're passing on those values, those beliefs, family stories. Because I think as we all get older, we cherish a little bit more about what our parents or grandparents, other people did. And so really helping kids understand what previous generations in your family and your family tree meant to you and what they mean to them going forward.
Great. I think that's very helpful. It makes me think of just a number of situations that we don't have time to go into now, but I just think that's very important. I think the ethical wills, just really talking about the values and what's important to you. But her question also made me think about a couple of concepts that you have in the book. One is the curious list, which is similar to the bucket list, and the other is the saving grace account. And I wondered if you could comment on and share a little of both of those with people.
Yeah, I think the curious list is a hybrid of the bucket list. The bucket list implies you're going to do something, you can harness responsibility, and can paralyze some people. A curious list is just a list of things you're curious about. That at some point you're going to spend some time and energy on it, but you don't have to make a commitment. So you could be curious about skydiving. That doesn't mean you have to go skydiving. You could watch a friend do it. You could watch a video or read a book on it. It just says you're curious about it. And that's important because curiosity creates motivation and encourages you to take that next step. An amazing thing happens when people retire. All the things you didn't have time to do but wanted to do somehow get erased from your memory bank. And so what we encourage people to do is grab a notebook and start writing these things down or have this curious list. And so all of a sudden when you are in retirement, you've got this list to look at to say, that's something I wanted to do. I wanted to pick back up a musical instrument. I wanted to learn how to quilt. I wanted to do these things. And you can take actual steps towards it. With reference to the Saving Grace account, we always talk about, on a savings account and how much you need 3 to 6 months worth of savings to support you. But you also need emotional support. And you really have to think about who is going to be your Saving Grace account? Who are going to be your emergency people that if something comes up, a medical diagnosis, a loss of a loved one, or you're having knee surgery, that you can count on. And so make sure you take the time to identify who the people in your life would be that would be there to support you at those times.
And I like this other part, just taking it a step further, because one of the other exercises that Bob has is listing, it's who are the people you can count on, who are your friends, and there's this lovely part where it's combining your friends and your curious list. So if you think about some of the things you're interested in, who are the people that might share those interests, so that you begin to think about how to connect with people. Because I think that's one of the areas that's so hard after people have stopped working too, that you don't have that work arena of people. And if you haven't thought about it ahead, it's, oh my God, I don't have any friends, I don't know anybody. And how important it is to recognize that's not the case. Or go ahead. Yeah.
Most people don't think about who they surround themselves with. But if you don't surround yourself with happy and outgoing people, you're not going to be happy and outgoing. You don't want to be, I'm not saying get rid of your friends who are depressed or not doing well, but if all of your friends are negative and not encouraging and motivating and active, you're going to find yourself a victim of that situation. So you do have to think about who do you want to surround yourself with. And then, again, we talk about, I'm an expert on investing, right? And here's what you have to do to grow your money and grow your net worth. What do you have to do to grow your social network base? What do you have to do to grow in your friendships and other things? Because it's not an investment most people make. Or if they do, they try to make it too late. And so, again, one of the things I encourage people to do is write down who do you want to surround yourself with in retirement, and then call them. Say, hey, I was on this workshop, or I was in this webinar, and they talked about who do you want to surround yourself with in retirement. I want to say, hey, it's you, because you're this and that. No one's going to be mad because you called it, but most people won't do it because they don't know how to do it. And that's where, again, it's that constant encouragement, information. You got to share things with them. You got to invest time with them. You got to tell them what's going on. You got to find out what's going on. So you do have to do those things, but because as we get older, we get worse at making friends, and it can be a major challenge.
Yep. Just a couple more questions, because I know we're past the time, but Bob said he could go a few minutes after if they're not too difficult questions. So Annie from Concord says, can you say a little bit more about creating an ethical?
There's actually a series of guides out there. I think her name is Susan Turnbull. I think she's part of NAS, and there's a few others that there are actual books that you can get. We're in the process of building one ourselves, just an online version. It's not ready yet, but for the most part, it's just going to take you through a series of questions about what's important to you. And so I would just Google ethical wills, and I think there's 2 or 3 well-known experts out there, and you can grab, I think, an ebook or book for $10 to $15 or something.
Yeah, I agree. Just you can Google it, and they're wonderful books. And it's really thinking about leaving your value legacy, different from the financial legacy. But there are some models of how to go about it.
And I'm sure there's even some free resources out there, I'm sure, too. Like it's just, you want the structure to kind of walk you through, and a lot of times the books or the other things will create a template for you to use. And I think that is a helpful part, because, again, I think people conceptually think, I want to create an ethical will, but I would encourage you, grab a piece of paper, grab your laptop or computer, and put it somewhere where you can print it off and hand it to someone else instead of just thinking you're going to get to it, but actually do it.
Yeah, great. All right, just 2 more, and then I'm going to have you give people all your contact information and how to get access to everything. Mary from California says, I see the Curious List and Saving Grace List useful for anyone going through a transition, even before retirement. It's a great way to practice and be better prepared when you do retire. So that was her comment.
And I agree. I think the important thing is the things that make for a great retirement story make for a great life leading up to retirement. And that's the biggest problem, that the ingredients, so if I had to list out 5 ingredients for the perfect retirement, they can be applied to your life right now. So if you're 30, 50, 70, or 90, you can still apply those same concepts. Don't wait to apply them. Do it now.
Absolutely. That's the way to reach it, but to not have the regrets, because you just never know, life can change on a dime. So Bill from Houston says, best webinar yet on the critical subject of the emotional side of retirement. Finding a second act with meaning and purpose is critical for a successful retirement. Well done. So he wanted you to have that.
No, I'm glad to hear that. And,
yep.
I love this stuff, and I apologize. I probably talk really fast when I get fired up because I do think there's so much there, and I think people forget that retirement's a privilege that many people never get a chance to experience. You really talk about the retirement savings crisis and people who die before they retire. When you get there, that's awesome. It's a real privilege. And I think the other thing that's awesome about it, it's not automatic. It doesn't just happen. That it really is about you structuring things that are most important to you. And again, we talk about this stuff, but it's about modeling. It's about doing it. It's about the nuts and bolts. And it's about people saying, why are you so happy? Or what are you doing in retirement that's so awesome? And walking them through the same stuff.
This has been wonderful. And right before the end, I'm going to have you have a final takeaway to say to people. But I know you mentioned a few times during it about some of the resources and all. Maybe this is a good time for you to mention. And when we send out the recording, we can send some of the links along with it if you'd like. So what are some of the ways people can get in touch with you or get a copy of Naked Retirement? And as I said, the slides will be sent with the recording. But what are some other ways people can access all of your wonderful information?
The easiest way to get a hold of me is just my email, which is just rl@robertlaura.com. So my initials at my name. My last name is Laura, just a girl, Laura. So I had to be very tough and fast as a kid with the girl as the last name. So that's the easiest way. The website they're probably going to find the most helpful, retirementproject.org. We're still in the process of, we're doing some upgrades and updates to that. What I do want to do, Dora, just for your listeners, is if you email me, just send me your email. I'm happy to send you a link, and I will get you a copy of 3 of my guides, How to Prepare Your Marriage for Retirement, 3 Things No One Tells You About Retirement, and 7 Questions You're Afraid to Ask. I can get you those guides for free, and I'll get you on my retirement wellness report as well. If there's any advisors on the line, that you can go to retirementproject.org and click the financial advisors, and I'll talk about if you have an interest in holding your own Naked Retirement workshop and other things. But email is the best bet. And like I said, I will get all the listeners and people on there those free guides, and I've got other ones too. And so if the dark side resonated with you, email me. I'll get you that one for free. Anyway, just if something came up, just don't be shy about saying, hey, Bob, you mentioned this. Can you get me this? And I'm happy to do it.
Great. Thank you. So I just want to remind that to all of you listeners to be able to be in contact with Bob. Bob, any last? It's been wonderful. I'm so appreciative of your being here today and sharing all of this, because I think it's so essential for people to think about. What final kind of takeaways or takeaway, whichever, might you want to leave people with?
I think it's 2 things. I think at the end of the day, it's really about putting yourself mentally in a position that says, if I'm sitting here on my deathbed, am I going to be able to say, I lived a no-regrets life? I created a no-regrets retirement planning. And if the answer is yes, great. If it's no, start doing some of those things today. You just have to take that first step. You have to do one thing to build that momentum. And then my final point is something I try to focus on myself, and it's just the concept of being more present. And that sounds a little Zen Buddhist or out there, but just recognize where you're at and what you're doing right now and what impact that has. You don't have to go out and change the world, but be grateful for what you got. Don't be afraid of your resources. Do something simple, fun, and outstanding today that'll make a difference for yourself, because if you can make that difference, you'll make a difference in somebody else's life.
Said. That's a lovely takeaway. I think it's very important for everyone to think about being more present and being connected with people, and in a sense what we can give back and give and connect. This has been wonderful. Thank you. Thank you again, Bob, so much for being here today, and thank everybody for being here, even with the little blip in the calling in and the slides right at the beginning. I'm appreciative that you all are here, and so I look forward to seeing all of you then. Thanks again, Bob, and take care,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys. I appreciate the opportunity, and let me know if I can be of any help or do something again in the future with you guys.
Thank you so much. Yeah, take care. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revolutionize Your Retirement Radio with Dr. Dorian Mintzer. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, listen to past episodes, or download our free retirement transition guide, visit revolutionizeyourretirementradio.com.